Hello everyone, Maoism here with a brand new video. Today's video is going to be a response to the Finnish Bolshevik on his video on Maoism. Now before I go on, Finbol is someone who I do somewhat respect. However, his video on Maoism was quite fucking shitty. Now I will leave a link to his video in the description below, just so you can watch it and make sure I didn't do this dishonestly. Yep, I'm doing the same thing as Sean does. Anyway, this video will only respond to the main points. His points on Mao Zedong thought, New Democracy, Protracted People's War, Mass Line, and the Cultural Revolution. Not in that order, mind you, but let's just get started. Now, to get something over with, let's start on something he is right about. Mao Zedong thought is Leninism applied to China. Mao Zedong thought is part of Marxism-Leninism and not Maoism. It was just ideas Mao put out that would help with the conditions of what China had at the time. To say Mao Zedong thought is Maoism is not only wrong, but incredibly stupid. He is also right that the idea of Maoism being synthesized by Chairman Gonzalo, and to be honest, this surprised me because the Leninists I have come across do not understand that, as well as thinking Maoism is just what Mao did. There are more things he gets somewhat correct, but we'll discuss in each of these upcoming points. Okay, so the first point he goes over is Protracted People's War, and he really has a dumbass take on this. Of course, like anyone that has no understanding of Maoism, he believes that the PPW is a military form you only use in rural areas. This is incorrect. It is more than fighting in rural areas. Hell, you don't even have to use a rural area. As Comrade Carlos Magrahela taught us, sorry if I mispronounced his name, we can use urban guerrilla warfare. Now the importance of the so-called countryside tactic is for base building. We need bases in order to plan our actions. You don't always need a countryside or a rural area, but just somewhere you have a plan of action. This is an important step of having a successful revolution. Now, of course, this helps perfectly with semi-colonial countries such as Brazil, Iraq, and pretty much all of Africa. However, it can be used within imperial countries as well. For instance, in imperial countries that, have colonized people, such as America, Canada, New Zealand, and so on, the colonized people can apply this to their struggle. Now, you may protest and say, these countries have little to no working class, which you'll be mostly wrong. The settlers are not a working class. Yes, but the colonized people are, along with the lumpen proletariat. If the Black Panthers has taught us anything, it is that the lumpen proletariat can be useful. The problem is that the majority of the lumpen proletariat are colonized people, and the settlers may have a hard time understanding this or just, accepting it. The main point is that the Protracted People War is universally applicable to not only semi-colonial countries, but to also colonized people within settler countries. Now, what about countries with no colonized people? You still have the lumpen prole being your lower class, petty thieves, and oppressed people, such as Sami, Roma, GSM, etc. Plus, the main idea is to organize a guerrilla army, and again, it doesn't always have to be in the countryside. But it has to be somewhere in a location where not a lot of people go, meaning abandoned buildings and so on. You don't have to be in a rich country and do nothing. That's third worldist opportunism. And I'm not saying it will be easy or you have to have an army in a day or so, but try to understand what Protracted People War really means and how to organize it. Without the Protracted People's War, there is no revolution. And you have to get in touch with the poor half of your community. The poor, you also have to get in touch with the ethnic minorities, the most oppressed people in your community, where they be gender or sexual minorities, or petty thieves. This is important for base building. You have to build a connection with these people in order for them to be on your side. Now again, not a lot of them will, but if you manage to get some form of an army or at least a base or a connection with them, that's all we're asking for, and that's a vital step for Protracted People's War. I'm saying this because Finbol basically says PPW is not really universally applicable, which is not only fucking stupid, but incredibly wrong. It is. It's important. Okay, so the next point to go over is New Democracy. Now, Finbol is correct in comparing it to the NEP, which it was a temporary stage for semi-feudal countries. The idea of new democracy in original Mao Zedong thought is that the classes are block of four: peasants, working class, petit bourgeois, and national bourgeois, to have a bourgeois revolution then work towards a socialist one. Now here I will admit to Finbol that the new democracy might not be applicable to every country, such as Iceland. Like, I can't think of a fucking reason why that fucking country would ever do it. And given the fact that feudalism is no longer a thing, some may question why even use it. However, for semi-colonial countries, this is very useful, even for countries that still have an absolute monarchy such as Saudi Arabia. This can help close the gap between these classes. Now, as for settler colonial nations, the colonized people will most likely have to form a new democracy, mainly made of colored working class, lumpenproletariat, farmers, petit bourgeois, in order to resolve this dialectic. Same for any other oppressed minority in any country: Kurds, Sami, Uyghur, Roma, and so on. As for countries that don't have these groups, Iceland for example, fuck you Iceland, I'm just kidding, can possibly skip this method of revolution. The reason these people need new democracy is because they are fighting two factions. Actually, they're fighting more than two factions. One, they are fighting off the already existing capitalist faction that exploits them. Two, the colonial mindset they have. This is a form of psychological warfare. I guess you can call it that. It's to combat and eschew the colonialist mindset. Examples being, Eurocentric mindset that affects the colonial subjects, such as having beauty standards or worshipping white skin and having this white savior and so on. And three, pork chop nationalism, which Huey Newton would call reactionary nationalism. Now, these do tie into the Cultural Revolution. So that being said, I reject the notion of the new democracy being not applicable universally. Now, the form of Chinese new democracy, the one they use in China, may not be universally applicable, but the idea of itself of a new democracy can be. I would argue if the majority of the worlds need it, whether they be semi-colonial or colonized people or oppressed minority, then a few countries, again, such as fucking Iceland, that don't need it, does not make new democracy not universal. So again, I reject this notion of saying that new democracy is not needed. You know what? I would argue in some countries where there may be a little to no oppressed ethnic groups or semi-colonial groups or colonized people, that the people that already are oppressed, such as again, sexual and gender minorities, poor people, whatever lumpen pro they have, new democracy may still be needed in order to, resolve the dialectic between these classes. Now, we may not have to go through a bourgeois type of revolution. Again, feudalism is dead. But the idea of new democracy itself and trying to advance it to a new socialist revolution is something to help close the gap between these classes. Now, the next point he goes over is massline, but I accidentally skipped it because I was doing research for this paper. I had to watch this video twice. However, so we're just gonna go to the Cultural Revolution. Now, we all know what Cultural Revolution means, so I will skip the definition. The issue I have here is that he says all the socialist countries did that. In reality, they did not. If he is talking about new art forms and propaganda films, then no, that is nowhere near a cultural revolution. Well, yes, the USSR did pioneer socialist realism. It is nothing close to an actual cultural revolution. Giving women equal rights is not a cultural revolution. Hell, in some parts of the old Russian Empire, women did have some form of equal rights, such as voting rights in Finland. What cultural revolution means is a struggle of the workers and the ruling class. It is to squash out the capitalist remnants of the old culture. Now, Finbol does know that just because you have a socialist economy does not mean you have a socialist society. He does mention this in his video that the struggle continues under the new socialist systems and you have to fight back against the capitalist half of the party and purge reactionary thoughts. You see, comrades, cultural revolution is more than just art and giving people equal rights. It's going to be a series of events that help push the world forward. There is going to have to be more than one if you really want equal rights, self-determination, and exploitation to stop. You're going to need more than one cultural revolution. Just because you overthrew the capitalists does not mean their ideas are just thrown out. Like a disease, it will grow more resistant to the last blow it was dealt with. This idea of a cultural revolution was more than just a social change, it was to help challenge the party. As the Soviet Union only focused on the modes of production, they failed to focus on society somewhat. Now, Finbold making the argument that the Cultural Revolution, when Mao did it, was not new, is still wrong. Yes, new art was made. Women began to have better rights, and people were beginning to have a better life in general. But there was no proper way of destroying the old thought. That's why when Stalin died, such shitty people such as Khrushchev came into power. So again, he's just wrong here, that the USSR and other socialist countries had a cultural revolution. Again, Finbold knows this, that the USSR didn't have this right to rebel attitude. They did take one action against the opportunists in the party, and that was the Great Purge of the 1930s. However, as to my knowledge, this only happened once, and it was mainly taken care of by party members, and not by the people. And what I mean by that is, the people most likely had no idea or understanding that they can also critique the party and its factions in this right to rebel attitude. There was no people such as the Red Guard protecting communist thought or a pro-communist military wing amongst the people to actively fight back against the corrupt officials. So I reject his conclusion or his statement that cultural revolution not being new. It is new in the sense that when Mao came up with it, it was new then. And it is universally applicable. Okay, so the last point we are going to respond to was his position on the mass line. And his explanation of the mass line was real fucking simplistic. It fucking hurt to listen to him explaining it in such a shitty manner. Jesus Christ, it was fucking painful. Sorry about that. It's just I get a little pissed when people either misunderstand something on purpose or they're just not very well educated about it. Now, for those of you who don't know, the mass line is basically an expansion of the vanguard. However, the mass line has a populist approach to it. So, of course, instead of relying solely on the intelligentsia guiding the revolution, the mass line says we have to struggle with the masses, and one way is gathering their ideas. We thus then analyze these ideas and see if they are, if they can help serve the revolution through a scientific process. Then, if it is agreed that it can be beneficial for the masses, it will be formulated to help advance the masses towards revolution. This line is to be repeated. The reason why this is uniquely new is because in the original Vanguard, it was only a small organization of people that were class conscious, and it held a small minority. And having that small minority can create a dialectic between the masses and the Vanguard. To resolve this, we have to listen to the people and accept their ideas. They need to know that they as well are a part of this change and that their problems are at least being heard. When Finbold says the Soviet Union had something similar to that or something like that, he is incorrect. The fact that they didn't have it is actually one of the main reasons as to why the Soviet Union went back under the control of capitalist roaders. Not to mention, it also created this disconnect between the working class and the party, and that could lead to a mistrust of the party. So this being something that Marxism-Leninism has done, in the sense that the Soviet Union has done it, is incorrect and shows an ignorance of not understanding or knowing what Maoism is. So that's all the main points. The rest of the video is quite boring and uninformed. He later goes on to say that it's stupid whether or not a party is ML or MLM and to get in a fight over it. And to this, I agree 25%. The 25% being that MLs and MLMs don't need to fight often and should use tactical unity against the growing right wing. Same thing with, anarchists. Tactical unity. 75% of disagreement being the fact that the difference between ML and MLM is not the fact it's needed, which it is needed, but the fact that there is a difference in general. Maoism is still somewhat new in being formed. It was coined around the late 80s, 1988 to be exact, and was being synthesized by the Shining Path, which led to Gonzalo Thought. Now, whether or not you want to stick with Gonzalo Thought, which I don't recommend you do, that's up to you. It's not the highest form of Marxism, but it is Maoism. The Pinoy are Filipino communists, Naxalite, Communist Party of India that is Maoist, and New African Black Panther Party are still forming the theory, so it's not fully easy to grasp. Now, how does this really differ from Marxism-Leninism? Other than the points Finball and I went over, there is the lumpen proletariat, which Marxists-Leninists don't consider a viable part of the revolution. Rejection of Mao Zedong thought. We're not rejecting all of it, no. We are rejecting the reactionary half, this being theories such as the Three Worlds theory, and not to mention Mao Zedong thought for the most part was only which was applied to China and their conditions at the time. And there is actually one main difference that I don't think a lot of people take note of, but what do Maoists usually consist of? Oppressed people that are from semi-colonial or have been colonized. The most prominent Maoists tend to be of colored background. The PCP, the Pinoy Communists, the Naxalite Indians, the Nepalis, the Maoists of Manipur, the New African Black Panther Party, the Maoist Party of Turkey, and North Kurdistan. Not saying people who are the settlers or the colonizers cannot be Maoists, they can. But there is a reason why most colored people or most oppressed people, whether they be settled, colored, or basically not really thought of that much, tend to grasp at Maoism, if not reactionary thought. It is because they most likely took inspiration from Mao during the Chinese Revolution. Not many know, but Mao and Stalin did not get along very well. They respected each other, but Stalin considered Mao to be insubordinate, and Mao would consider Stalin to be a dogmatist. I mean, there were a group of 28 pro-Stalin members in the Communist Party of China. However, these fools had a terrible leadership because they tried to apply what worked for the Bolsheviks in the 1910s and 1920s to that of the 1930s and 40s, and plus it was a different playing field. Mao decided to ignore Stalin because Stalin did not know how to deal with the problems in China. This inspired people such as Huey Newton because it was something our people experienced from the settler communists. This parallels the reason why people of color pick Maoism, whether they be in a semi-colonial nation or colonized people with an imperialist nation. The settlers are the people who already benefit from the system, even though they mean well, have an issue with dictating of how we should run things. This idea of anti-colonialism, this idea of national self-determination for us, these are our problems we have to fix for ourselves. Yes, we are planning to work with you in terms of, Marxist-Leninist Maoist means, but you can't control what we do. You can't be the boss of us. If you think there's some concern, you can critique us, but you can't have a direct control over us. And this is something that bothers some Marxist-Leninists when it comes to at least the colored Maoists, because we have a hardcore anti-cracker rhetoric. And by the way, you don't have to be, technically a colonized person to be a Maoist. You can still be white and a Maoist. You can be a Maoist in Europe, because most of the people in Europe, at least from my knowledge, from when I talk to people who live in the Balkan regions, are colonized under NATO. So Slavs can definitely be Maoists. Sami, Roma, the Gypsy people, the Jews, any other oppressed minority, Basque, Irish, they can be Maoist. And even the English, if they want to be Maoist, even though they're not oppressed, they have to understand when it comes to national self-determination for the oppressed people within their European country, they have to, kind of have to take a back seat a bit. They have to kind of get cucked. Why? Because you can't dictate what that oppressed minority feels or what they're going through. You can't always know what they're going through. Like, I would never tell a woman how to organize or whatever. I would never tell a Chicano or a Native American how to organize or do this or do that, because, well, I don't know their struggle. I really don't. And I know this scares most Marxists because they think we're splitting the working class when we do this. In reality, we are not. Believe it or not, in settler countries such as America, New Zealand, Canada, and Australia, the oppressed people, that are constantly getting shit on, we're the working class. Us New Africans, we're the working class of America. Same thing with the Chicanos, same thing with Native Americans. We are the working class. And I know there are exceptions to the rule. There are going to be white people that are in the working class condition, and there are going to be, black people in the rich class, position. But history has shown us, at least in America, that anytime we put our trust in y'all, it didn't turn out too well. We can't always rely on you. We can't have this white savior attitude. So you have to understand that we are doing it in the Marxist-Leninist Maoist means. We are doing it for the theory. We are learning the theory and trying to apply it internationally. But when it comes to our national liberation and our own self-determination, you can't tell us shit. Like, we can't tell the Asians or Muslims shit. Same thing in other European countries. Like, if you live in the Nordic countries, you can't tell the Sami shit. You can't tell the migrants shit. They have to figure it out for their own. You can educate them on this subject, but when it comes to the actual planning and wanting to nationally liberate themselves, you can't tell them shit. You can't dictate them. It's a painful truth. It's something that we have to accept. And that's another thing. What drives people away from Maoism, at least most people, is not the fucking, massline, protracted People's War, Cultural Revolution, or so on. It's that Maoism is heavily involved in identity politics. To be honest, not all of us like it, but we understand the importance of it, and how we use it properly, unlike the fucking liberals and fascists. And listen, comrades, if you want to learn about Maoism, I suggest you check the sites I have listed below for sources. If you want to understand what IPOL is important, I have a video on that as well I put in the description. And I might even revisit it, because I know so many dumb fucks are going to comment, IPOL is not needed, anti-scientific. Reality, the whole idea of Marxism and identification, the basic fucking ontology, is, fucking, it's fucking part of Marxism, let's be honest, guys. Working class, that's an identification. The pressed people, these world theories, this is identification. This is basic fucking ontology. Just because you don't like the fact that philosophy has gotten into the science half of it, doesn't mean that it's not anti-scientific, or it doesn't mean that it's not needed. This is basic ontology. Also, one last point before I sign off. If you are asking as to why we even need Maoism when MLs learn from their mistakes of their past, well, if they had learned from their mistakes, then why the hell are they still Marxist-Leninist? If further advanced theory has continued to be synthesized and is eschewing incorrect lines, why the hell do you still call yourself a Marxist-Leninist? Marxism-Leninism had been stretched out to its last breath during the Chinese Revolution. And what came with that were some mistakes being the Three Worlds theory, in thinking there is only semi-colonial and semi-feudal worlds. These were later eschewed by Comrade Gonzalo, and later synthesized as Maoism, which he later added his own theories, some which is correct, such as a blend of decentralized and centralization of military strategy, in combining mass work with military work, and some incorrect, such as a degradation to a personality cult and blatant homophobia. And the ongoing revolution in the Philippines that have seen better outcomes than the PCP, along with furthering the struggle for not only national liberation, but also queer and trans liberation. With these combinations, we further advance the theory. With these new added theories, we enter a higher epoch of Marxism. From the classical stages of owning factories to the days of classical imperialism and world wars, Maoism is the answer to neo-colonialism, warfare, national self-determination, and liberation of the oppressed people. So if you are a Marxist-Leninist and you agree with the shit I said, you're not a Marxist-Leninist. You're a Marxist-Leninist Maoist. Maoist 98 signing off. Jesus fucking Christ.